What is up, guys? It is another day in the MLB world, and we are here for you, as always, on the MLB Deeper Dive. So make sure you are liking this video and subscribe to the channel to see all the content we have from Awesemo all day long. But I am Chris Spags, joined once again by the best player in DFS, the namesake of this YouTube channel and of Awesemo.com. You know him as Awesemo. I know him as Alex Baker. How you doing, Alex?
Wow, I thought you're queuing up Terry here. Doing good today. We got a massive MLB slate, so it should be a lot of fun. Yesterday, a really interesting one where I feel like we made a lot of good recommendations. Where like the bats that were chalk were a little suspect, but then the pitching that we're kind of like relying on didn't pull through because Corbin Burns gave up a few runs. So that's baseball. I like how in baseball you can never be wrong. You can just say that's baseball, and just like whatever you get wrong. Terry, how you doing, man?
Corbin Burns is the worst 9-strikeout day in history. But
yeah, seriously.
Terry, I got to introduce Terry as well. Of course, the man responsible for all of our customer success at Awesemo, a man you see many times on here who knows baseball as well as anybody on this live stream or elsewhere. Terry McBride, how you doing, Terry?
Doing good, guys. Doing good. It's been, it was a interesting slate last night. I feel like I got the pitching right, but I landed on trying to force in too many of my Yankees bats, like I said I was going to do at the end of the show, and you warned me against it, Alex. even my sneaky path to getting to those bats, which was Adam Wainwright, came through, and the Yankees bats let me down. So I was pissed about that. But it was a fun night, fun slate to watch. Had a few lineups, a few stalking horses that didn't come through, but it was a good one. How about you guys? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, Alex, did you win any hundreds of thousands of dollars yesterday that I missed? Given the fact that I have to say, to our credit and to Alex's credit in particular, not a lot of DFS shows yesterday would have said, hey, fade the Yankees or go lower on the Yankees against Matt Harvey. And this is the one show, thanks to our own Alex here, that did have that. So did that lead you to the pay window yesterday, Alex?
Not particularly, because I built all my lineups like an hour before lock, and I had like all this Yastrzemski, and he wasn't in the lineup, so I just went through. I deleted all my Giants lineups with him in it. They're like the team you needed last night, so that really hurt me. But I did see our boy Guda Saab up at the top of the standings. Although then this morning I went to bed before the slate was over, and then I woke up and he was like tweeting about some bad beat where he lost in that extra innings or something. So it was a wild night all around.
Yeah, it is a wild night, and that's why we are here for you guys along with all of our premium tools. Today, the MLB Top Stacks tool is a free premium tool on Awesemo.com, so make sure to go check that out. And also, while you are checking out the things on Awesemo.com, take a spin over to NoHouseAdvantage.com because they are our sponsor here who is taking their own take on daily fantasy sports by offering player prop contests across the NBA, MLB, NFL, and PGA for cash prizes. And their exclusively peer-to-peer fantasy sports platform levels the playing field and gives it a lot of easier chances out there for you to win real cash compared to your traditional DFS sites. They have over 500 player props offering. No House Advantage is the largest provider of player props in the industry. And the best part is that new users receive a $20 match deposit bonus with the promo code Awesemo. So go to nohouseadvantage.com, download No House Advantage in the App Store, and use that promo code Awesemo when you sign up for that $20 deposit match bonus. It's a great site to be playing on. Again, the DFS format, you're just grading your prop bets from a 10 to 1 ranking there. So just your highest confidence when you're given 10 points, lowest confidence giving 1 point. There's a lot of ways to make money on No House Advantage. So play over there for the MLB, for the NBA, for all the sports that you care about. And let's get into the slate, guys. As I mentioned, the Top Stacks tool is free. The Top Pitchers tool is not free today. So we're going to start there for you guys. So hit that like button here. We're going to give you guys a lot of the previews of the information you can get at awesemo.com/join for yourself. But today, the pitching does seem like it is going to boil down to Lucas Giolito slate going against Detroit. 24% chance of being the top pitcher. Going to also be incredibly highly owned, not too far away from where Corbin Burns was yesterday in that aforementioned really great strikeout day that somehow did not work out for fantasy. But in this spot for Giolito, Alex, it does seem like he is going to be one of the better positions. We all know going against Detroit is, unfortunately for Detroit fans out there, going to be one of the best spots in the league for the most part. They have a 27% K rate over the last season and change going against right-handed pitching. This particular lineup today, a 25% aggregate K rate. They're going against Giolito, who's been striking out about a third of the batters he's faced since last season. Similar rates going back to 2019. And Alex Giolito's stuff has been good. I'm terrified to say any guy is going to look good after Corbin Burns somehow looked good and then didn't come through. But Giolito in this spot, hard to imagine Detroit really hammering him. Hard to imagine him not finding some strikeouts. Is there anything you can nickel and dime here about going heavy on Lucas Giolito today?
No, I mean, he looks fantastic. His strikeout rate has been really locked in on this 32 to 33% range over the last 3 seasons. little bit of a small sample. No, actually, I was looking at the wrong column here. So I think we can be confident he's well above average in strikeouts. And then Detroit's lineup doesn't feature a lot of strikeout guys, but I'm not feeling that good about my Motor City Mashers either because they don't have a lot of power. So the chance of Giolito busting here is pretty low, and the strikeout upside is solid.
Terry, how are you feeling about Giolito here? After, again, people sometimes, I think the day after a chalk pitcher doesn't quite get the results that people are looking for, I feel like the ownership does tend to trickle down a little bit, but still we're going to see a very chalky Giolito today and a very nice spot against Detroit with 3 implied runs. So are you going heavy Giolito? And I guess, does the situation change for you playing a little bit more on FanDuel?
Yeah, I'll be pretty heavy on Giolito in general in my lineups, but I will probably duck under the field if they stay in that like 35, 40-ish% range. Just by a little bit. I'll still probably have 25, 30% of them, but I'll just be maybe a tick under. I usually don't love to push beyond 30%, like I mentioned yesterday, on any given starter, even unless it's a major upside spot where there's no other options on the board, like what we saw with Jake DeGrom a few days ago, where he was the clear upside spot. So yesterday I was a lot more spread out maybe than most. Today it'll probably be the same thing. I do like some other options. I think Walker Buehler's got a chance to put up a good start despite some diminished stuff that we'll get into. I think Scherzer's on the board for sure. And then some of the Montoses, the Jose Quintanas of the world. So there's other guys to get to. But yeah, I think it's a killer spot for Giolito. The one thing I'll say about Detroit is they're cut their strikeouts a little bit so far this year, but they're still, not a strong offense. They hit a little bit for power. Overall, the league marks for power against right-handers are down in general. So they've got a 169 ISO that ranks 8th in baseball. That's not a crazy power mark. It's just that power against righties is down completely. Top team ISO is 204. Only 2 teams are over 190 in general so far this year. If you extend that back to the start of 2019, the active roster has a 146 ISO in the split. So there's not been power there. They create runs 13% worse than average, even including the power this year. So plenty to love about Giolito, plenty to not like about the Tigers offense here. I think he's in a smash spot.
So another popular pitcher Terry mentioned as an alternative today is going to be the pay-up option, but does seem to look a bit less bad or less good than Giolito, according to the projections, especially relative to the price point. But Max Scherzer, a guy who has been a monster overall the last few years, but the number's starting to fall off a little bit in the last season and change. He fell to a 32% K rate since the 2020 season. Going back to 2019 was at a 34% K rate. Swinging strike rate falling a little bit from 15% to 32%, from 15.8% to 15%. Chase rate falling from 34% to 32%. So there are some worrying signs for Scherzer, in addition to the fact that I know Jeremiah Johnson mentioning in the chat, I guess there are some BVP stats that don't look good for Scherzer versus Toronto. That's not something you're going to look at for the most part because you want to see a longer term sample size. But Scherzer has been a guy who historically struggles with home runs, and more struggles with home runs again over the last season, and changed to 3.6% home run rate for him from about a league average 3% home run rate going back to 2019. And Alex, the net results for me with Scherzer is that I just don't think he looks like as good of a play going against Toronto. We're also out there parking, have a pretty warm day, an 81-degree day. 4 guys who strike out above league average, so not as many as Giolito will be facing. There's a lot of things here that, for me, would put Scherzer to be a fairly distant second behind Giolito, but do you feel differently here? Is it a spot where you'd want to pay up for Scherzer to get somewhat contrarian?
Yeah, I'd say he's probably down the list in priorities today because of the ballpark, and Toronto is still playing in Florida, so they have that kind of spring training park that should make it a lot easier to produce. And then the Toronto lineup is very strong, a lot of extra bases, and it has less than your average strikeout rate, which is a unique combo because usually higher power strikes out more. But that's not the case with this team. So all the factors are kind of pointing away from Scherzer and towards other guys today.
Terry, how are you feeling here about Scherzer? And one correction here from Jeremiah in the chat. I guess Scherzer has had particularly good success against Toronto, which I said in the chat, but normally people are only mentioning the hitters doing well against pitchers and never the inverse. So credit to Jeremiah Johnson looking at the whole picture, even though BVP is still not the best thing to look at. But Terry, how are you feeling about Scherzer in the spot going against the Toronto team? As Alex mentioned, playing in a park in Florida that has had a lot of home run power since they moved there for the pandemic.
Yeah, so Scherzer's on the board for me. It is an uncomfortable pay up, but I think it might be worth doing, particularly where we can get to some inexpensive bats, which I think there are some on the board when we get to stacks. He projects out decently for me. He's not my top projection, but he's in the top handful. He's in the top 6, let's say, and it's pretty close after my top couple options. So he's on the board. He'll mix in for me, but he's not the strongest. He's not Max Scherzer in a crazy Max Scherzer smash spot. So I'm willing to, leave some of them on the table compared to where I normally would want to get to as a pay up to be different option. But I really like the ownership mark on him for the public. There's not a lot of ownership on him on FanDuel. So I think that can be exploited. It's Max Scherzer. So if there's a guy that I'm going to trust to pay up for, even though he isn't necessarily looking good so far, isn't necessarily in a great matchup, he's one of the top options to trust in that situation if you're going to roll the dice a little. So knowing that it's a bit of a dice roll, knowing it's a bit of a gamble, I'll take it. Blue Jays so far this year, 23.9% strikeout rate against right-handers, puts them about middle of the pack. Only a 140 ISO. We just talked about the power being out against righties in general, but that's got them down the board a little ways, creating runs 13% worse than average against righties. So there are a couple things to pick apart about the Blue Jays lineup, but they are an excellent lineup. They do hit for power. They do limit strikeouts in general in a larger sample. They also might be getting George Springer back at the top of this lineup tonight, which would be another ding against Scherzer. Excellent hitter there. So I'd be a little concerned about that. Not over rostering Scherzer, but I'll have some.
Let's talk about one other high-priced option here. And again, we're going to talk about the top pitchers. We're going to talk about some of the lower-owned pitchers. We're going to talk about top stacks, all that stuff. So stay tuned with us throughout the show. And we even have a little money time halfway through. So we'll give away the top 5 owned plays as well on DraftKings and FanDuel. So stay tuned. Hang out with us here. And again, hit that like button. We appreciate the supports on the MLB shows, especially because it is still a tough time for MLB with the NBA going on. So your support here does mean a lot for us. So make sure you are hitting that like button. Let's talk about Walker Bueller, another guy who is going to be a high-priced option today, but to me, kind of like Max Scherzer, I'd rather go to the guys a little bit cheaper, and I'm holding off on one guy who does finish above Bueller on the top pitchers tool that you can get at Awesemo.com/join. The Bueller in this spot, I think to me, the concern is really that kind of like Clayton Kershaw being priced like a stud, but compared to some of the other guys who just pitch deeper into games, get a lot of strikeouts, and Bueller's 26% K rate over the last season and change is concerning to me. If you go back to 2019, it is a 28.4% K rate. That looks a little bit better, but I think there are better matchups here on the slate, Alex. I know the Cincinnati 2.8 implied run total does stand out, but projection you have for Bueller seems to indicate that he would be a little bit behind at least 2 or 3 other guys on the slate. So how are you feeling about Bueller with about, 1/5 the field expected to be on him on DraftKings?
I think you can probably do better than Bueller. So I don't think there's anything wrong with him. But the price point is very high for a guy with his strikeout rate. So last year he finished with 27%. This year he's at 22%. The swinging strike rate has been about constant over the past 3 years. So I do think he's been getting unlucky with strikeouts so far. Cincinnati is just an average matchup as far as strikeouts, but an above average lineup. So this one isn't one that I feel like the matchup's working in his favor. So I don't hate him. I think he's a good pitcher in a good spot. But if you're just looking at the money line and the team totals, he'll stand out as one of the best. But I think as far as strikeouts, there's other guys with better potential.
Terry, are you in agreement here? Very high likelihood you're getting a win from Bueller today, given the fact the Dodgers are about a 2-run favorite here at home. But Bueller's strikeout rate falling off here. Are you on team maybe going under on Bueller? Or are you buying in a little bit more here because he has shown the ability to spike an upside, and it is a slate where he will be less owned than some of the other stud options?
Yeah, he is typically one of my go-to guys, particularly when he's coming in lower owned. I'm a little concerned about him, though. He is projecting well in my model because it's not accounting for some of this stuff just yet. But just looking at some of the underlying numbers, his swinging strikes are down a touch from where they'd been the last 2 years. They were at about 12%. They're down at 10.7. It's a small sample, but he is only striking out 22.1% of hitters like you guys just talked about, down significantly. And what really concerns me is the average velocity on his pitches across the board. All of his pitches is down about 2 miles an hour from where he was at last year. The spin rate's still there. Everything is working the same. It's the same dynamics. It's just coming in with a little bit less velo. Could be early season, small sample type blip, but I'm a little worried about that. So having an indicator like that is kind of something that would lead me to get off of a pitcher more than a narrative base. Like if I can spot something significant, I'll tend to, trust in the narrative more. So I think I'm going to be getting under the field on Bueller. I think I'm going to be getting off of him more than my projections would suggest. And the Reds are a good spot. The Reds are a good offense against him here. Their active roster is 8th best in baseball with just a 23.2% strikeout rate this year. They are that league leader against righties with a 204 ISO, so the only team over a 200 ISO against righties so far this season. And they've created runs 13% better than the average in the split this year. So they're dangerous. I would be worried about over rostering Bueller on this slate.
All right, another star, or not star pitcher, but a guy who's on the upswing who is going to project like a star pitcher today on the slate, does have a higher probability or higher ownership rather than his probability of being a top pitcher. But Cristian Javier, a guy who has shown some decent upside recently, the strikeout rate for him over the last season and change has been about a 27.5% K rate. Maybe some worrying numbers, a swinging strike rate, not as high as you'd like to see, under 10%, chase rate under 28%. Also not the best, but the thing for Javier is that he's facing a Seattle team who has a lot of guys that strike out here, a 27.4% aggregate K rate in their lineup, and just doesn't have a lot of quality hitters as well. Terry, I would say Javier to me would be one of the plays that I like the most out of these guys at their varying price points, and definitely more for me than Scherzer as well as Walker Bueller. But how are you feeling about Cristian Javier? Are you buying in on him having really quality strikeout stuff? Because he's one of those guys I think it's going to depend on how you're viewing him and how he's done for you, and he's done well for me, so I might be buying it a little bit more, but there could be some underlying numbers that maybe aren't the best.
Yeah, no, he's done pretty well. It's a 36.4% strikeout rate in 13 innings so far this year, put up a 25.2 last year in 54 innings. And those numbers were sustained throughout his minor league career. So he was a kid that the Astros were looking forward to. I think it's a good matchup here against Seattle. Seattle's been a little bit frisky given the bats that they have in that lineup in terms at least of creating runs. They're only 3% below average in a year where it's just a down year for offense in general. So they haven't been bad creating runs, but 25.3% strikeout rate for the entire active roster puts them around middle of the field against righties, a little bit toward the negative side, actually. So bottom 11 teams in the league. So I think there's definitely, plenty to target there with Javier. The price is a little higher than I'd like to pay. Like, I'd much rather get him at like 88 on FanDuel than 94. Just give me a few more dollars to play with. Similar story at 93 on DK. I think he's definitely rosterable, one of the stronger options on the slate. I would just like to get him at a little bit lower of a price. Maybe that's because I haven't fully adapted to the idea that he's an elite, potentially elite pitcher. I do love the ownership on FanDuel, though, so I'll be getting to him.
Javier struggling a little bit with power over the last season, plus 4.1% on run rate, 211 ISO allowed to lefties. And Alex, I think this is one where I'm curious to see your thoughts, because I think you can make the case for Javier, but also there are some guys maybe a little bit cheaper who are going to project similarly according to your projections that people can get for themselves. So how are you feeling about Javier, where he does seem a bit over leveraged on the top stacks tool, but maybe not as much as some of the other pitchers that we've talked about?
Yeah, I think Javier is a solid option. Definitely a guy I was excited to see what he's bringing this year, given that he had a pretty good start last year. He hasn't gone very deep in games, only averaging 4 2/3 innings per start. So that is a little bit concerning. But his strikeout rate has been extremely high over those, so I'm just kind of chalking it up to striking more guys out, takes more pitches. So his pitch count has been in the 80 to 90 range. So I'm feeling pretty comfortable with that. Matchup versus Seattle looks good, as Terry was saying. So I think he's a very solid option today. And I've kind of observed you never want to avoid Houston pitchers. That's been the trend over the past few years. So definitely thinking of that in the back of my mind.
Especially this year, as it feels like they're playing Seattle in every series they're playing. So that probably is going to help out some of these guys for now. One other pitcher that I think is going to qualify, going to be a little bit lower owned than some of these guys. And I guess we have one more chalky pitcher to hit on Draftkings that seems a little bit jarringly chalky, but I'll pause for that guy for now. Let's talk about Ian Anderson, though, a pitcher who does have a pretty good chance of being a top pitcher on the top stacks tool. Actually, not that far behind the Walker Buellers, Cristian Javiers of the world. And this has been a spot for Ian Anderson. We just saw the Cubs. I think yesterday, Terry mentioned watch out for the Cubs bats blowing up the pitcher that they were going against yesterday in Charlie Morton, and ended up being a day where he did get blown up a little bit, at least by some of the hitters for the Cubs. Anderson, the same situation today with a 28% K rate overall in the last season plus. The numbers for Anderson have looked good. He projects well. Terry, I'll since you nailed the Cubs blowing up Morton yesterday, I'll give you a chance here to talk about Ian Anderson. And do you think that he gets blown up today by a Cubs team that has a lot of power, really 1 through 6, every single guy over 200 ISO?
Yeah, they're not projecting the same way for me today, so it's looking pretty different. I think I'm more on the Ian Anderson side of this one, and I think it's got a lot to do. I'm just pulling up his contact metrics. I think it's got a lot to do with his ability to keep the ball in the yard. And I just want to see, he's at a 1.23 home run per nine so far this season, but it's a 22 inning sample in which he's given up 3 home runs, so that's a little forgivable. Last year gave up 1 long ball in 32 and a third innings. And he's been good throughout the minors in keeping the ball in the yard. Limiting home run power, has been reliably below a home run per nine throughout most of his minor league career, where he's got a significant sample. So he's very good at that. He's not, he's not allowing too many fly balls, and he's keeping the home run per fly ball down, as you would expect. Over a 50% ground ball rate so far in his major league career. So there's a lot to like about that. And it's really suppressing the Cubs' power marks, where they were pretty good power marks yesterday in the matchup against Morton. Despite the potential for strikeouts, I was just getting them. The power was leading to higher projections. Top end of the lineup always projects pretty well. They're just excellent players. So Hap, Contreras, Rizzo, Bryant, and Baez, you can always roster those guys with some reliability for a little bit of upside, but they're not projecting for any kind of home run numbers for me. And they're just getting their normal, base hit type of projection. So I'm much more on the Ian Anderson side. He projects pretty well for me. I like the price at 8,400 on Fanduel. I just updated the ownership, so my take on Christian Javier's ownership was a little behind. Apparently, he's going over leverage now, but I do like the ownership mark at 7.1% on Fanduel for Ian Anderson. So I'll definitely be getting some of him against the Cubs lineup that typically is one that I do like.
Alex, how are you feeling about Anderson here? Again, Terry mentioned some of the numbers. I'll throw in a few more. He's pitching over about 5.4 innings per start, so a good number there. And he's facing a Cubs team, 6 guys that strike out above league average. So seemed like a lot of positives going for Ian Anderson, who also has a 1.7% home run rate and is limited major league sample size going back to last year. So are you buying in on him? And I guess the top pitcher, still worth pointing out, does look slightly over leveraged, but pretty much flat with where the ownership it seems to be.
Yeah, Ian Anderson. This one's all about the strikeouts, where the Cubs line up. As you were saying, Spags, they have some good power, but they also strike out at a average rate, which combined with Anderson being a pretty good strikeout pitcher, does lead to a pretty nice looking projection. The team total for the Cubs is a lot higher than some of the other options we've been discussing, so the potential that Anderson gives up some runs is higher, but I'm still willing to take some shots on Anderson. I think he's underpriced, and the ownership is a lot lower than some of the other pitchers that we've been talking about.
So one more pitcher we should hit on amongst the top pitchers today. And again, that top pitchers tool is part of the Awesemo Plus package that you can get for yourself at awesemo.com/join. Top stacks tool, which we're going to talk about more in the back half of the show. That one's free today. So if you want to check out all the top stacks, see some of the data that Alex himself uses, all the guys on staff here are playing for the most part are using the top stacks tool as a major guiding principle. So check it out for free today on the site. But let's talk about Jose Quintana, who on DraftKings projects for over 30% ownership, about twice the chance of him being a top pitcher. He is a value play, and Quintana, the numbers have been very volatile for him going back to last season, which is not the biggest number. He's only faced 95 batters since last season, but a 30% K rate, a 1% home run rate, but a 1.8 whip, a 4.10 BABIP. He is all over the place with these numbers, but is going to be one of the highest owned players on the slate today, Alex. And the projection you have for him, I think, is going to also have people probably getting there a lot. So how are you handling, given the fact that as an optimizer play, does seem like Quintana is going to pop up quite a bit going against Texas, but still a spot that he does seem a bit overowned, perhaps more overowned than anybody on the DraftKings slate.
Yeah, I think Quintana is a really solid option. I mean, the match versus Texas is great, not only because Texas is a rebuilding team, but they also have kind of constructed their roster in a way where left-handed bats are a focal point, so their better players are left-handers. And Quintana, being a left-hander, is going to face a weaker roster or lineup than he normally would. So another right-handed pitcher would, excuse me. So I do see he's been struggling this year as far as giving up runs. He's started 3 games. He's given up 12 runs over 10 innings. So that's been really abysmal. But it does look like he's been getting very unlucky because his xFIP, which kind of takes into account the like the number of hits and walks and all that, and the park, only has him at 4.2, which is an above average mark. So It does seem like he's been getting very unlucky this year, and strikeouts have been solid throughout his career, but so far this year, 31% with a higher swinging strike rate than he's had over previous years. So I do think Quintana is a very good option today.
Terry, how are you feeling about Quintana here? Again, counting for the fact that on Fanduel, where I know you're playing a lot of your lineups, he's not going to be as big of a play, going to be about 5%, or actually a 5% chance of being a top pitcher, along with 13% ownership. But give me your thoughts. Is he in play at all on Fanduel? And would you be comfortable taking him as an SP2 on DraftKings?
I love him as an SP2 on DraftKings, and I'll be over the field on him on FanDuel. Absolutely. This is for me, it's a smash spot. I love these value pitchers, even on the one pitcher site. I'm typically hunting for guys who are priced down and allow me to get to a lot of bats. Particularly this year, with strikeouts being up and pitching performances being up thus far, it's a narrative. I've looked into some of the numbers. They're supporting it. It's still a narrative for me at this point. But pitching has been the story of the year so far. I think this is a killer spot. Alex just mentioned some of the marks behind it to support why it's a great spot. To add to that, the Rangers have been better this year striking out against lefties, but that mark is still 24.9%. So basically a quarter of the time these guys on the active roster are striking out against lefties. Extended back to the start of 2019, that's a league worst 26% strikeout rate for the lineup against lefties. This season, they've created runs 24% worse than the average in the split while posting just a 109 team ISO, hitting only 8 home runs. These guys are known for their power. That's the one thing they do sort of well. So, yeah, I would not be worried about Texas getting to him. I think there are a ton of strikeouts here. And like Alex said, he's gotten really unlucky. 462 batting average on balls in play against him so far this year. That's absurd. So taking into account the fact that he's allowed 12 hits in his 10 innings, 12 runs, only 10 earned. Yeah, he's gotten somewhat unlucky with his fielding and just with balls falling in where, potentially they should have been caught. So love Quintana here. Smash spot, helps you get to a ton of bats.
Just real fast on the other side. I'm going to quick little guessing game here for you guys. Maybe you'll know it offhand, but do you want to guess what Mike Foltynewicz, the opposing pitcher's home run rate has been since last season?
I don't know the home run rate, but I know how many he's given up this year, last year, the year before, and the year before that.
Oh, that's not the question I asked, Terry. So now that's a pass from Terry. Alex,
I wrote it up a different way.
100%.
10.3% home run rate after facing 107 batters since the 2020 season. So he has been unbelievably getting hit, and he hasn't been unlucky either. Only a 220 BABIP. So I guess that's
league worst 8 home runs so far this year.
Yeah, Foltynewicz, what a wild player. Not a hot day in Texas, though, for whatever it's worth. Let's talk real fast before we do some money time stuff. Give me, Terry, one lower-owned pitcher that you're intrigued by, because as always going to be the case at MLB slates, the top pitchers dictate a lot of what the field's going to be doing, but there are a few guys here, according to Top Pitchers Tool, maybe a little bit under-owned. So does any one of them stand out for you, Terry, on FanDuel or DraftKings?
Let me take a look at the ownership. I don't have a great way to look at that. Let me throw out a couple names that are probably lower owned, even though I'm not looking directly at the ownership. You can tell me if I hit one of them. Guys that are projecting fairly well for me that are a little offbeat. Zach Eflin, for all the reasons that we talked about yesterday with Zach Wheeler, is projecting fairly well. I do not trust it nearly as much as I trusted the Wheeler one, though I'm yet to really dig into it. So he's projecting fairly well for me. I think he's a little off the board. Chris Paddock against Arizona. Arizona's a little bit better than we expect them to be so far this year, but that's more against lefties than it is against righties. I still trust Paddock. I like the price, get a decent projection on him. And then Adrian Hauser is another guy I'll throw into the mix for only 6,500 going up against that same Miami lineup. I think there's strikeout upside there. I think there's significant upside for him to get the win, suppress the opposing offense. 8,000 on DK, it's a different story. 6,500 on FanDuel, I like it. I'll have some shares.
Alex, any low-owned guys, whether it be one that Terry just mentioned? I know some of these guys, Paddock, Eflin, all guys who do appear to have a higher chance of being a top pitcher than their ownership. Is there any of them that you want to either co-sign on that Terry brought up, or any that you're feeling particularly worthwhile to bring to the people?
I'm looking at this Tampa hosting Oakland today as a good game for pitchers. Montes, not a great strikeout pitcher, but he's been at 23% over the past 2 years. And Tampa's lineup has a decent amount of Ks. The park is indoors, so that's it's never a great place for bats. So the main thing is Montes is very cheap at 7,300 on DraftKings. So I think he's a decent alternative to Quintana, although projects worse. The other on the opposite side is Waka. he's pretty much unknown today, and I understand why. Is because he's not he doesn't have a very long track record of being a good strikeout pitcher. In fact, over the last 4 seasons, he just hasn't been a very good pitcher in general. So what I'm looking at here, of course, a new team in Tampa. His strikeout rate so far over 4 starts or 4 games is 25%. And that's accompanied by an increase in the swinging strike rate from a career average of 9.7 to 12.5 this year. So I can understand why people would be really hesitant to click that button, but the matchup versus Oakland, they got a great team as far as power, but they do strike out a reasonable amount. So he's kind of the contrarian pitcher I'm looking at.
Yeah, probably some volatility there because of the power that Alex mentioned. Waka giving up a 225 ISO since 2019, but definitely has shown an uptick in strikeouts, going from a 20% carry to a 24% carry over the last season. So Waka definitely has shown some signs of life recently, and more power to him for that. I guess we always got to be proud of pitchers showing improvement, even if they do end up or don't end up in a winning lineup. Let's flip the hat. Let's do some money time here, and let's see if there's any Rougned Odors of the world who are going to be shockingly overowned, and let's see if Tyler could hit the cash register sound effect while he's looking at his phone or his genitals. It's hard to tell. Let's talk about the top 5 owned plays on DK, and smash that like button, guys, because these ownership projections are always available for you if you are a paid Awesemo Plus member, but we like to give them away for free when I'm on the show here, because that's what money time's all about, the most profitable time in DFS. Top 5 owned plays on DraftKings: Lucas Giolito, number 1 at 42%. Christian Javier, number 2 at 32%. Gio Urshela, another chalk value Yankee, 31%. Jose Quintana, number 4 at 31%, rounded up. And number 5, Fernando Tatis at 30%. And Terry, really dedicated Yankees fan, Gio Urshela here, 31%. What are you doing with him?
I don't Mr. Gio Urshela that much. He's not. This isn't a hitter. I know he's been good since coming to the Yankees. He had a 219 ISO in 2019, over 476 plate appearances with the Yankees. He was at 192 last season and 174. He's at 181 so far this year. That's more who he is. And then before coming to the Yankees, over 288 plate appearances in 2015, when he was just known as a slap-hitting defensive player. He had a 105, below 100 for 2 years after that. This isn't a defensive-oriented infielder that we're talking about. I do not care what he's done in these small samples. Yeah, he's been improved, but he's Gio Urshela. He's going to hit 2 home runs tonight because I'm saying all of this. If he's going to be rostered that much, it makes as much sense as it did skipping Rougned Odor last night. Get to your Yankees in different configurations, and do not make Gio Urshela your focal point. Do not make Gio Urshela your most highly owned one-off player.
Yeah, we'll talk more about the Yankees in the top stacks portion, and I'm sure Alex is going to have some very prescient thoughts about how to handle the Yankees today, given, oh boy, these boys are even higher owned than yesterday somehow. Let's talk about the Fanduel top 5 real fast for all of our Fanduel players out there. Top 5 owned players according to Awesemo's ownership projections: Fernando Tatis, number 1 at 34%. Gleyber Torres, a different chalk Yankee on Fanduel, 33%. Lucas Giolito at 30.4%. Aaron Judge, number 4 at 29%. And Giancarlo Stanton at 29%. Now I'm just going to get joy for making Terry have to say to fade these Yankees. But Terry, Gleyber Torres at 33%. How are you feeling about him as a devout Yankees fan?
Look, at least those are more defensible. At least you're rostering the right Yankees along with the field if those are the ones that you're going to. So, yeah, if you can figure out good ways to put them together, we talked about it yesterday. It's just very difficult to put those guys together. But the home run marks are up from where they were yesterday, taking on Bruce Zimmerman. These guys should smash lefties. They're an entirely right-handed lineup, except for Rougned Odor, who, let's hope he's not in there lefty-lefty tonight, but he might be. But, yeah, get to some of these lower-owned guys if you're going to Yankees bats. Get to an uncomfortable Gary Sanchez. No, he's even 20%. Get to Clint Frazier at the bottom of the lineup to mix things up maybe. We saw LeMahieu go a little under-owned yesterday, and he's still cheap. But the Yanks are just very difficult to justify given the ownership, even for a big homer like me. So it's a great spot, but everybody's going to be there.
All right, Alex, let's talk about the top stacks here, because as we mentioned earlier in the show, the top stacks tool is free today. So if you want to show a little love in exchange for that little free product, hit that like button for us here and go check it out on the site, because it is going to be one of the more valuable weapons in your arsenal for building MLB DFS lineups. But today, Alex, it looks like we have the Yankees 11% chance of beating the top stack and 25% ownership expected on DraftKings. So even higher than going against Matt Harvey yesterday. They are facing Bruce Zimmerman, a pitcher with not the biggest sample size in the majors. They only faced 121 batters over the last last season and change, but an 18% K rate, giving up about a 257 ISO to the right-handed side of the plate. So a lot of worrying things, but not the hottest day in Baltimore. So I guess maybe a bit of a knockdown for that. But Alex, how are you handling the Yankees, given the fact that literally every single player in the Yankees lineup is projected for over 10% ownership?
Yeah, that's pretty shocking that on a 13-game slate, they are accounting for 25% of all the bats, which because each lineup has 9 batters and wait, is that right? Anyway, 8 batters. So that means that the max stack is 5, right? So if it's 25% ownership, that means more like 40 to 50% of lineups will have a little bit of Yankees in them. So that is an insane number. So I mean, the spot looks great versus Bruce Zimmerman, but if the thing is, on a 13-game slate, most of these teams are in the 4 to 5% or 4 to 5 runs range, with a few between 5 and 5.5. The Yankees are at 6, so the chance that one of these other teams has an outlier day and outscores the Yankees is massive. It's like 90% according to the simulations. So just like yesterday, I feel like you're better off playing the odds and just going with the field over the highest owned team, because the discrepancy is so big between the Yankees ownership and every other team.
Terry, how are you feeling about it? Because on FanDuel, it is going to be a very similar situation, not quite 25% of the field, but a little bit under 24% of the field on the Yankees, with similar probabilities to be the top stack. Are you moving away from them? Are you just hemming your ownership down to a certain amount? Because, you could take out Stanton, Urshela, and Gary Sanchez and maybe get the ownership product down a little bit, but that's just me sort of making an argument that maybe doesn't need to be made. How are you handling them on FanDuel, Terry?
I mean, I'll have some. I'll let them trickle in around the edges for sure, but I won't be rostering them with the field by any means. I think those numbers are insane on this big a slate. So yeah, just like Alex said, you've got like a 90% probability that another team's going to outscore them. You want to be on some of those other teams at low ownership. And there are other spots that look, I mean, there's a couple other spots that I consider better. Like the Angels are explosively blasting through the top of my model today. So I'll be getting to a ton of Angels. There are just other spots in general that I think are at least competitive with the Yanks. So there's just plenty of room to move around the board. I don't think we need to over roster Yankees here, particularly with the field that high. So I'll be undercutting them for sure.
All right, let's go to those Angels then, because I think they are the team that does seem to have the second highest odds of being the top stack and much more reasonable ownership. They are just slightly over-owned on DraftKings, or actually no, slightly under-owned on DraftKings. On FanDuel, it looks like they are about the same, just a little bit under-owned, but basically flat for the most part. And the Angels are going to be going against that guy we talked about a couple minutes ago, Mike Foltynewicz, who has been really hit hard. There's really no way to say it besides that. Giving up a 45% hard contact rate since last season. Going back to 2019, a 41% hard contact rate. So it's not like he was doing a lot better, even when he was getting slightly better results. And the Angels, about as quality lineup as you're going to find today, with Anthony Rendon back in the mix. He came back in yesterday, I believe, for the first time in a while, and now in there again. Been a strong hitter against righties for a while, so you have some different ways to stack it up. And Terry, you mentioned the Angels, so I'll give you your floor here, but how are you handling them? And I guess, is there anybody you're avoiding because of the ownership? A guy like Ohtani jumps out more on DraftKings, with about 26% of the field expect to be rostering him today.
Yeah, so I wrote the Angels up in my article this afternoon. I think EMAC touched on them in the spotlight hitters as well. They just look spectacular in this spot. We talked about all the reasons to roster hitters against Folty in terms of all the power and the home runs that he's given up. Massive home run upside for this team. I actually had to get in there and fiddle with my model just so when I put out my power index, which you guys can find in there, which shows just a general average of all these home run numbers, I had to adjust it so that it made any sense in terms of the scale of any other teams, because it's just broken with Foltynewicz right now. So I wouldn't, a lot of the ownership is getting soaked up into Mike Trout on FanDuel at 23%. And then similar story with Ohtani at 25.9% on DK. A lot of the rest of the team is in single digits, or Mike Trout around 10% on DK. So you can still roster these guys in combinations together. It's the three hitters you really, really want are Ohtani, Trout, and Rendon, but I like getting to Jared Walsh. I think there's plenty of power upside in Upton. Albert Pujols, I made my home run pick of the day just because it's fun and it's Albert Pujols. And Albert Pujols has a 180 BABIP this year, batting average on balls in play. So his triple slash is 222, 279, 460 to start. But if you were getting a little bit luckier, not hitting a bunch of atom balls, which they shift and he does hit atom balls, he'd be a lot better off. We'd be talking about a bit of a resurgence. Only striking out 11.8% of the time. 238 ISO on the year is up from, he was down in around 200, which is still very good last couple years. So give me a little bit of Albert Pujols. I think Iglesias and Kurt Suzuki can be sneaky at the bottom. Top to bottom, there's a lot to like about this Angels lineup tonight.
Alex, how are you feeling about the Angels here, given that it is still a 13-game slate and the Angels are going to be pretty well represented as a number 2 probability stack to be the top stack on the slate? But Terry just mentioned a lot of the case here going against Fulton-Evich, the fact that he's literally breaking power index slates that Terry has put together for himself. How are you feeling about the Angels here? And I guess, is there a point where the ownership gets too onerous on a 13-game slate where just being flat maybe will be the equivalent of being overowned?
I think the Angels look solid. Definitely a lot better ownership than the Yankees, where it's really only Ohtani that has really massive ownership. And then on Fanduel, it looks like Trout has 23% projected, which for Trout's fine, I think. So them getting Rendon back, it really helps because he's been a all-star level player the past 4 or 5 seasons. So that just increases the number of ways you can combine these Angels guys, because there are a couple of guys in the lineup usually that aren't very good fantasy plays. So I think they're a solid option. If I did go to the Angels, because their ownership is a little bit on the mid to high side, maybe I'd want to put in one of those contrarian pitchers.
This is just a thought in general, but and it's maybe one of the general approach question for you, Alex. But in this situation where, Trout's going to be owned, Rendon certainly going to pop up for people, is there more equity in going to a Jared Walsh or Justin Upton, like getting those guys in a 3-man stack, let's say? And it's just me talking theoretically here, because these guys have a pretty good likelihood of Trout and Rendon to get on base. Trout with the 441 on base percentage. Maybe they pitch around him as best they can. Rendon to over a 400 on base percentage against Fulton-Evich, a guy who hasn't had the best control, and they could still hit him obviously, but does it add any value to go into a Walsh or an Upton just because you're probably going to have guys on base in front of them and they have the power clearly to knock them in at much less ownership than a Trout or Rendon will have?
Yeah, definitely. I think Walsh and Upton look pretty solid. I do feel Upton, he had a really rough year last year, but this year so far he's been batting for power. So 238 ISO. Oh shoot, I'm looking at that is Upton. Okay, so he has had a lot of trouble getting on base the past 2 seasons, but he's been hitting for power still. So that's exactly who you want in a GPP. Pujols, Terry was mentioning, his power has been pretty good this year. So I think there's something to this, especially when it's like a 3-man stack. There is a little bit more value in trying to stack up guys that are close in the order. So going like 5, 6, 7 with the bottom of the lineup could be a winning strat for sure.
All right. So
yeah, sorry to cut you off there, Spags, but I just wanted to, say it makes sense based on what you were saying too, with the notion that, if they're going to avoid anyone in this lineup, it's going to be Mike Trout. They're going to try and pitch around him. So if you get one of those 3-walk games out of Mike Trout, you're still rostering the guys very likely to knock him in behind him here by going to these guys. And Jared Walsh has shown ridiculous power upside. 9 home runs, a 354 ISO in 108 plate appearances last season, 4 home runs in 81 plate appearances with a 236 ISO so far this year. Definitely want to include him. So just to pile on, I think it's a killer spot. And your point is really apt about the on-base percentage for those sluggers. Even if they're not having that breakout day, they could still help you, and they tie into the upside of these other guys behind them in the lineup.
Yep. No, it's a good point. I think it's obviously tough on a 13-game slate to talk too much about game theory kinds of things. We try to squeeze them in where we can, and could be a few spots here to talk about here. Similar one for San Diego. Decent implied run total for them today, going against Merrill Kelly, who has struggled with his own power issues, not quite to a Fulton-Evich level, but a 4% home run rate since last year. Go back to 2019, a 191 ISO allowed. Not the best strikeout pitcher either, only a 20% K rate. Going back to 2019, 19% K rate over the last season plus. And San Diego going to have a lot of ownership going to Fernando Fernando Tatis. Not a lot of ownership going to these other guys. It's weird looking at the stack ownership because it seems like people are going to very much favor Manny Machado, going to be favoring Jake Cronenworth. But then in between, nobody going to Trent Grisham. It looks like nobody going to Eric Hosmer, nobody going to Will Myers. Is there upside, Alex, in going to the stack just because they appear a little bit overowned according to the top stacks tool? But the way that it's spread out, it's clearly the Tatis ownership that's driving a lot of the stack ownership.
Definitely, yeah. It's always helpful to go into the individual player ownerships to try to figure out, well, how many people are going to have the stack as opposed to just one player throwing it off. The positional scarcity is clearly what's driving the Tatis ownership because shortstop is usually a defensive position, but he's a reasonable price and he's a great hitter. So I don't have any problem going to him, but definitely overowned compared to his chances today. So I do kind of like stacking the team because, as you're saying, like there are a bunch of guys on the team that it looks like are going to be pretty low owned. So you could put Tatis in there or not, but Grisham, Machado, Hosmer, Myers, projected 2 to 5 look pretty solid. So that's a good observation that the Tatis ownership is really making the stack look overowned.
Terry, how are you feeling about San Diego here? Are you as into them as your other Southern California team today? So glad you're eschewing your Yankees today to represent my native region right now of Los Angeles and its greater areas.
Hey, the coast's got to stick together, right? So, yeah, it's a spot that I'll get to. I'm not sure how much. The top end of the lineup projects pretty well for me, but it really starts to trail off once we get past Will Myers. So the Jake Cronenworth, Jurickson Profar, Victor Caratini end of this lineup doesn't project great. No ownership on it, and the prices are right. But it kind of pulls some of the stacks out of play for me based on the way that I do my sorting process. But I do like getting to that top end. I'm happy to roster Eric Hosmer and Trent Grisham here against a righty at essentially no ownership. Grisham in particular, Hosmer's burned us a lot of times with he's supposed to be a better hitter than he is. He's supposed to have more power than he does. But he shows flashes and is certainly productive enough to roster him here. But Grisham's really interesting. Last year, 252 plate appearances, 10 home runs, 10 stolen bases. Year before that, small sample, 183 plate appearances, 6 home runs, and a stolen base. So he's got power upside. He's got speed for days. I think we can get to him, particularly at the top of the lineup in a good side of his splits. So I like that. Manny Machado, definitely throw him in there. A little cheap at 4,800 and a little under-owned at under 15% on DK. Probably like the Padres better on DK than I do on FanDuel.
Yeah, I think that seems about right to me as well. And yeah, again, that Tatis ownership going to be the high part on either site you're playing on today. So keep that in mind if you are stacking up the Padres. Let's see another top stack team. Then we can just sort of pick here because it does get pretty flat actually. But Houston, it does seem they are a little bit behind the Yankees, the Angels, the Padres of the world, but still a decent chance of being a top stack. One of the better leverage spots for them in terms of their ownership shares not being that high. And Houston in this spot, it does seem like worth getting some exposure to, Alex, but maybe not a team that you're dying to have relative to some of the other guys we talked about, but they're going against Marco Gonzalez, who I don't know, like he just never jumps out to me in a meaningful way that I want to attack. He does give up a lot of production, and as a lefty, you do have a lot of qualified hitters in that Astros lineup going against him. But is Houston worthwhile to you in a major way, or are they just one of those stacks you're getting that have about a 5% chance of being the top stack, but you're just happy to get whoever you get in that range?
Yeah, I think Houston looks solid. The ownership is being driven down because the prices on these guys are a little bit high. So, also, as a lefty, Gonzalez has the better of a couple of their good hitters in Brantley and Yordan Alvarez, who are going to stick out as bad values because of the lefty-lefty matchup. But in baseball, like I know one of our favorite sayings here is pay up to be contrarian. So you got to just kind of be like, okay, I know Houston's going to be the best team 5% of the time and not half as many people are on them. FanDuel a little bit more popular and reasonably priced. So I'm playing DraftKings here. And you got to find some cheap pitchers that you like to make this lineup work. So it is a little bit tough to build the lineup, but it does have a reasonable shot at taking down a GPP. So I think it's worth having some lineups like that.
It's kind of wild that Michael Brantley is the second most expensive Astro on DraftKings behind Carlos Correa. Like seems odd given that Brantley does not hit lefties that well, at least for power, compared to Yordan Alvarez, who actually does hit lefties. 324 ISO for him against fellow lefties compared to a 132 for Brantley. But it's a bit of a pricing aberration there, it does seem, for Houston, but maybe a pay up to be contrarian for all these guys. Terry, how are you feeling about them on FanDuel? Whereas Alex mentioned they are a little bit cheaper, but again, their probability of being a top stack pretty flat relative to the rest of the field compared to some of the other teams we've already talked about.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much I'm going to get there. The prices are up comparatively in, the high to mid 3,000s, pretty much from 1 through 6 in the lineup. So where you're getting to some of these other teams in the mid 2s and high 2s, I think they're a little pricey by comparison. I think you can still build to get to them with ease. The pricing is, the way it is on FanDuel. But there's going to be enough ownership on them across the board. It's not all concentrated on one guy like we saw with some of the other teams. I might be willing to jump in and out with some of the lefties and go lefty, even against an effective enough pitcher like Marco Gonzalez. I don't really sweat too much with Yordan Alvarez and just his immense power and upside. 324 ISO lefty in his career so far with a 175 WRC plus, only a 23.1% strikeout rate lefty. So I'm good to go there. He actually hits lefties a little bit better so far in his short career. Tucker, you lose a little bit on. He hits 181 ISO as compared to a 231, so significantly worse there in terms of power. 16% worse creating runs as compared to 6% better on the other side of splits. So you lose some with Tucker, you lose some with Brantley. But I'm good with going to Yordan Alvarez here. Could be a little bit sneaky if you get that. So, 14% ownership, though. So it's a little tricky. The guys I want to roster are going to be rostered and they're priced up. But those are the bats I'm looking at in terms of getting to this team. I don't really sweat the matchup against Marco. It'll be interesting to see how they come out in the wash.
All right, let's talk about some of the lower owned stacks here to close out the show. And guys, hit that like button. We appreciate it a bunch. Obviously helps us keep the lights on, but also with MLB content in particular, we're trying to make sure to get the MLB content as many eyes as can be seen as possible, because the NBA is certainly dominating the DFS streets. And clearly we have a lot of good things to talk about with MLB, in addition to all the free premium tools and regular premium tools on Awesemo.com. So hit that like button. Helps us out a bunch. Let's talk about some of the other stacks that are jumping up meaningfully to you guys, because it is such a big slate. It's hard to talk about everybody. Our boy Andrew Mock asked about the White Sox in the YouTube chat. Top Stacks is free today, so if you like a stack, feel free to check that link or check out the DraftKings version of the Top Stacks, so we'll see which ones you like. But I'll throw out Atlanta as a team that jumps out to me going against Trevor Williams. I am not a believer in the Trevor Williams renaissance. Greg and I had a debate about this on the strategy show a couple days ago, and the numbers to me, I think, still seem as concerning if you just look at, going back to last season. I don't think him leaving Pittsburgh has made him a new man, and I think going against Atlanta, who has a really high power ratio here, a little bit too high because of Ian Anderson hitting surprisingly well in his 3 at-bats. But still, Atlanta has a lot of guys who can do damage. Going against Trevor Williams, who has a 4.4% on run rate going back to 2019, seems pretty good to me. They're also a little bit under-owned, so that's another positive part here. But Alex, how about you? Is an Atlanta team looking good to you? Is there anybody else who stands out amidst these teams that mostly are going to look flat when you're looking at the Top Stacks tool?
I think you got a lot of options to mix and match here, but a couple of teams I feel like might be lower owned because the pitcher they're facing is high owned. So that could be a spot where you could get a little contrarian. So one is Seattle. They have a team total of 4, which is reasonable. So we have them as about half the ownership of being the top stack. Texas looks even better because Quintana is popular because he's cheap. And Texas, because 30% of lineups are going to have Quintana, that just is like 30% of lineups that won't have Texas. Not that anyone's going to them in the first place, but the pricing is pretty reasonable. So I don't mind doing that tonight because some of these popular pitchers, because it is pretty flat as far as run production, the teams they're facing also have a decent chance to win the slate.
Terry, how about you? What are some of the lower owned stacks that you're looking at that you consider to be either core plays or ones that you're willing to get a good amount above the field on?
Yeah, so one way I like to look at it is by the power index that I started including in my tournament strategy article. It gives the average for the home run marks in my home run model for the full lineup and then the top 6 in the lineup. So Atlanta stands out to me for pretty good marks across the boards. You were just talking about them. I get a little bit of Philly, getting some Oakland splashing up there. I agree with Alex on Seattle. They have an interesting little differential too between the top 6 stand out for power a little bit more than the full lineup does. So getting to the top 6 in that lineup makes a lot of sense. The White Sox are definitely in play on the board here for me. But Atlanta was the one that really stood out. They were third behind the Angels and the Yankees in terms of power today.
All right, so we're on the same page. Always good when great minds think alike on this show. We got a question here in the YouTube chat, which I'll take from Max Video 35 saying, who's a random bat from Baltimore that gets the double dong tonight? I don't know if he's saying that just because Baltimore is random or because going against Corey Kluber has been a very profitable situation for a lot of hitters recently. But, let's do this for the thought exercise. Alex, if you had to pick one Baltimore hitter who could hit a double dong tonight against Corey Kluber, who would it be for you?
Well, they have about one power hitter in their lineup.
Trey Mancini? Is that what yeah, I was going to pick Trey Mancini.
But anyway, yeah, that would be no fun. So I'm kind of eyeing DJ Stewart batting third. To be honest, not a name I think a lot about, but he had a 261 ISO last year. So far this year, only 114, but to be honest, both of these years are pretty small samples. But the track record of power is decent. He has a 60 raw power on Fangraphs from his prospect report. So I don't feel great about it, but I think DJ Stewart.
I like that we're changing the home run game to just which Baltimore Oriole is going to hit home run today. Terry, with Trey Mancini taken off the board, which Oriole do you think could hit a double dong off of Corey Kluber today?
Yeah, so I can't take Cedric Mullins because he went double dong yesterday, and he is not much of a home run hitter anyway. That was a bit of a surprise. DJ Stewart would have been my next pick going lefty-righty. So with Mancini off the board, my home run model's telling me to go to Michael Franco. He gets the better mark for power in my model, but my heart's telling me to go to Austin Hayes, one of my dynasty keepers in the league. So I'll go for the younger guy. I'll go for Austin Hayes here.
I was also thinking Austin Hayes, but now you've taken him. So I'll go to the 8 hole, get a little leverage on Terry here and go to Freddie Galvis. Who's had random multi-homer days in the past that I've been a beneficiary of. And that's what I'm going to take here. 4.5% on run rate against righties, but hey, going against Corey Kluber, anybody is in play here. So that's a fun one to keep in mind. Any final thoughts from you guys here, or should I just do the Awesemo Hall of Fame and close this out?
I have a quick question to throw to Alex, if you don't mind. You mentioned, Alex, shortstop being kind of a short position, and it is. We do have a few standout players at the position, but a lot of the times you get worse players there. So if you're not going to Tatis at that heavy ownership, say you were one-offing shortstop, which I think a lot of people tend to do when they build 4-3s on Fanduel, who would you go to in that spot as a shortstop one-off?
Yeah, that's actually the answer I was kind of queuing up before you said as a one-off was that you're just gunning for someone at the bottom of the order to get more plate appearances because the stack does well. So I'd probably be looking for someone towards the bottom of the order that has decent power in my stacks. But as a one-off, there's a lot of great ones. Since everyone's going to Tatis, I guess maybe just going to one of the other high price guys like Trey Turner. He's 52. I guess it's like half the ownership. Yeah. A guy that can hit for power and has speed. Or the other option is just taking a guy that's really, really cheap because like a lot of nights there might be 1 or 2 guys in the 2 to 3K range. And those are worth getting just because they open up like everything else for your lineup. So that is generally a criteria I'm looking for in a one-off, is that they just make something possible that's not otherwise achievable just by stacking.
Kind of like what you were saying the other day for grabbing outfielders there. Yeah, like a Dansby Swanson stands out at 2,500 on FanDuel for that capacity. Great upside for a home run. Probably going to have some ownership on him more than you'd want, but maybe like a Paul DeJong at 2,900, good upside for a home run against Eflin. So yeah, it just wanted to pick your brain on that. Thanks.
There you go. So that's Terry's Question Corner, one of our hottest new segments here on the Deeper Dive. And one of our other hottest new segments is going to be for all of you guys. Let's hit the Awesemo Hall of Fame before we jump off this link and give some praise to the people who have been newly inducted here. Yesterday, we had a surprise induction of Awesemo. He didn't even know. He didn't come prepared with the full script we normally like to have. But the Hall of Fame, the way to get in on it is to tweet at Awesemo HOF whenever you have a decent win of any size, really decent for you, really. Not even, don't worry about winning 100K. Don't worry about winning 50K. If you feel proud of your win, tweet it at Awesemo Hall of Fame or at Awesemo HOF, because we're proud to see any of these. And you can see some of the screenshots on the screen right now. We have Jake Mears, who has won $10,000 thanks to Awesemo himself
Nice.
2 months ago, but this time he's rocking that Awesemo avatar. So this is a second 100K or second big win here for Jake Mears, a true first ballot Hall of Famer. He is. Other Hall of Famers here, Indo Burrito, who picked up a nice little prize point in the NBA dribbler. I don't know why, Tyler, you love an big Indo Burrito
Big fan.
It's our guy Tyler, but winning some from Fanduel money there, $350 win for that person. That could have been what got him going on their journey in DFS. That's what we like to see. We got Kempachi Zaraki in here, only playing NASCAR for about a month, got his first win this weekend thanks to the Awesemo.com data, and that is something that you could jump into any of these sports. NASCAR, the MMA tool is going to be a top fighter tool, is going to be a really big asset. You can play sports you don't even know and get results, and that's what Kempachi here is doing. We got I Hold My Own tweeting at Josh and Rinpack saying, he appreciated the show this morning. Took down the slate. Needs to stop messing around and get the Awesemo badge. He should, because he'd win a free month of Awesemo Plus. We did have that Awesemo badge on there, so make sure you're getting your own avatar at awesemo.com/avatar. And our last Hall of Fame inductee, no surprises for Awesemo here, getting inducted again. It's Mike Tadadajewski, who is all over the late night nickel on FanDuel, winning $40 there. A big win for him. And again, it's all about winning and whatever you're playing. Max out the tournaments you're playing. If you can only afford the quarter arcade, play the quarter arcade. It doesn't matter. Just do play smart, win the tournaments you're in. That's what we care about seeing here. So we appreciate all those guys. And quick, I guess we'll go out with the super chat from Kevin S. asking, quick question. Any love for Far Tenma Pants in his first start today? I knew he was doing the prank, but you paid $5, and I'll read, much like Most Sislak on The Simpsons, I will read your pranks out loud for the sake of all the bar patrons. So Alex, any love for Far Tenma Pants today?
I mean, yes. I think second only to Kevin Stadler himself.
So there you go. So Far Tenma Pants, lock him in on tonight's slate. Follow at DigitalB21, follow at Awesemo DFS, follow at Chris Spags, follow at Awesemo_com, and go check out the tip off on a different link here on the Awesemo YouTube channel. You got the tip off, you got the deeper dive, and then you got me again for NBA Live Before Lock, because I can't stay away from talking about multiple sports in one day. But I appreciate you guys. I appreciate our producer Tyler as well. Hope you guys have a great day. And of course, good luck.